All right, so yeah, I wanted to do a bit of a talk on how we can improve our productivity from an engineering perspective. So how can you make use of AI tools in your day-to-day? And basically what it boils down to is I'm going to share with you some stories where I found some cool stuff and AI has helped me along the way. And Nelson didn't trust me that my presentation didn't have malware on it, so I'm going to run it from my own PC. So sorry about that, but we'll figure out the logistics as we go. If it works. Let's try that. All right, so yeah, I have two wild cats, Elfie and Poppy, which, I don't know, you'll see them throughout the presentation, but I've been in cybersecurity for about 10 years. I did a year stint as a developer. I enjoyed it, but I wasn't at a very good company, and so I quickly moved over to AppSec and worked for British Police Force, in finance, for a big tech company in Japan called Rakuten, and now I'm working at TCM Security. So these days I'm kind of just doing teaching, secure development, working as a consultant, not full-time pen testing at the moment. So it's been a nice break actually, where I can do a little bit more research and give more back to the community as well. So yeah, if you've seen my live streams, then you know that's kind of what I've been doing day to day rather than just breaking stuff, which is cool. So a lot of people talk about a lot of the big stuff that's happening in AI. So I've kind of got like a bit of a cheeky AI sales cases here. We see a lot of vulnerability scanning. We see a lot of automation. And I see a lot of stuff where almost like a whole package. But actually, as an engineer, I think there are lots of smaller use cases where I can be more efficient or more effective, maybe not even faster, but better at finding vulnerabilities. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. So how you guys as engineers, or if you're a team leader, or if you're in an organization, how you can try and enable your engineering team to be more effective, basically. And not worry too much about the consequences. We will talk briefly about OPSEC later on, because uploading all your source code to ChatGPT is not a good idea. So just a heads up there. Some people do it. Honestly, it's crazy. So the first use case I've got is payload expansion. So for some of you in the room, you'll know this as template injection. Basically, what happens is if the templating engine is vulnerable, instead of seeing 3 times 3 here, we'll just see 9 on the page. And what we can do is we can say, hey, can you generate me a bunch of payloads for different scenarios? So for example, can you encode my payload so that maybe it bypasses a web application firewall? Can you give me payloads for different templating engines? So instead of Ginger 2, you might be looking at Twig, for example, or EJS or whatever. And some of you are probably thinking, I use React, so go home. But templating engines do still exist. So this is kind of my first use case. But this is also kind of a bad use case for AI, because word lists have existed for a very, very long time. They're trivial to create. And if you go to payloads, all the things on SwissKey repo, you'll find all of these payloads available to you. So what's funny here is that we're missing context. And whenever I see a blog post or a video or a deep dive on AI tools, everybody's saying that AI is missing context. But when I'm testing, if I just buzz an application and I send all of these payloads to try and see what happens, I'm not paying attention to context. And so this meme, I actually searched for context meme, and I stole this from a LLM blog post. So I was like, that's perfect. So a lot of people, yeah, they say AI is missing context, but us as human testers, sometimes we act like human scanners. We basically just plug in a word list. And I'm going to show you this in a few minutes as well. So we have vulnerabilities that exist within web applications that are very context specific. So no 2 web applications are the same. When we're talking about things like SQL injection, yeah, maybe because we can send a bunch of payloads and it's probably going to cause some errors or some strange behavior. But when we do something like mass assignment, and don't worry if you don't know what mass assignment is, I'm going to show you. When we talk about mass assignment, it requires context, because the objects within every application is different. And by objects, I mean things like a user object. So when you log into an application, you're a user, you have a username, email, whatever. You are an object. Sorry to objectify you. And you also have things like your accounts maybe, or maybe you, as you'll see in our whiskey shop example, a whiskey bottle would be an object, or a product would be an object. And mass assignment is an issue. It's also called object injection, and this abuses the feature where we merge properties into objects without checking them. And this is really common in Ruby on Rails, really common in Laravel, and really common in lazy node developers like me who like to use the spread operator. And so I basically say, hey, take everything from the user and shove it into the object. And that's basically how it works. And there's a code example here. But basically, yeah, it allows us to add and update sensitive properties. But some applications, like I say, context is really important. Some applications have username, password, and that's it. Some applications have a user role. Some applications have moderator is true. Some applications have all sorts of different things. And so here, what you can see is basically at the start, we have our user objects. We've got Jeremy, and then we have a puts request. So we're basically updating Jeremy. So when you go to your account and you say updates, this is the information that I'm sending. But here, I'm sending the role as admin, and then the outcome is that I become the administrator, essentially. So this is mass assignment or object injection. And it doesn't just happen on users. The user object is kind of like the simplest example, but I found this on a financial application before. The best mass assignment I ever found was I could change the currency of my account. So I could change it from dollars to pounds, transfer that back to dollars, and then change it from dollars to pounds again. And voila, we have infinite money. And it's faster depending on which currencies you choose. So luckily, I was on a pen test and not doing dodgy stuff. So, but it's probably the coolest finding I ever had. So as you see, like financial attributes, subscription levels, ownership IDs, and stuff like that. And you're probably thinking, where does AI come into this? And we're kind of going to get to that soon. So here we have Whiskey Shop, and I'm going to show you quickly how to break this. Now, the Whiskey Shop demo is based on an application that I tested, I think like 18 months ago, maybe just after ChatGPT 4 came out. And it's not exactly the same Whiskey Shop. The reason I'm using this lab is because I'm pretty sure I checked about 6 months ago, the company still haven't fixed the bug, but it's a very similar themed application, and it still exists on the internet, and I'm surprised it's still there given the findings. So when we come to the Whiskey Shop, we come to here. I'm gonna have to like bend over and type, and we'll see how this goes. Often when we go to an application, you can see that we just test, and I'll do something like I will create test account like this. Usually I'll create multiple accounts, try and see some discrepancies between them. And here, somewhere, wherever my web suite is, let me close this. You can see that we have the request. So this is on the left, the request that you send to the application. So you can see that I sent the username, the password, and on the right is basically the text response that the web browser is going to interpret. So when we're testing for mass assignment, if I send this to intruder, and let's say I'm just going to put this as like test 1, what I'm going to try and do is basically automate my checks. And in this case, what actually happened is I knew that the account had a role property. So the user object had a role property. And that's because it was using JSON Web Tokens. So some of you will know what JSON Web Tokens is, but I saw the role property within the JSON Web Token. There are other ways to find this. But in some cases, you can guess this. In other cases, if you have access to source code, it's quite easy to find. But in this case, we're just going to go role equals. And I'm just going to put new user in for now. So we add this here, and then all I'm going to do is switch this to here, and I'll just set this up very quickly and then explain it. I'm going to load in some user role values. So here we've got true, root, admin, administrator, etc., etc. So basically what we're going to do is create a bunch of accounts, and for every account, we're going to try and inject a new role. or a different role. We don't know how the application is going to react. We don't know whether it's going to crash. We don't know whether this role actually means anything. We don't know the keywords. And this is where fuzzing comes in. So what I also need to do is just follow redirects like this, and then click start. And so you can see we've created a bunch of accounts, and a few of them came back as 500, but usually when we look at the length, when we create a bunch of accounts, you can see my payload here with subscriber and manager and to and root. If we go over to the length of the response, most of them are 5,767, but 2 of them are different. And so the application is behaving differently and responding in a different way. So if we have a look at this and come and look at the response, and if I render this quickly, you can see that this account has some kind of subscriber benefits. And so here we found mass assignment. Now that's just the demo. This wasn't actually how I found it. The target that I used was a little bit more complicated. And so I needed some help. And we could, if we had time, what I'd do is I'd go around and I'd get you all to kind of like write down what the value could be. But basically, I used AI to give me test cases. So here is a good example. I'm testing for mass assignment. Can you give me a list of values without bullet points, because I'm too lazy to format data, of user roles that might exist in a whiskey shop? And you get all sorts of things like bottler, taster, manager, staff, moderator, distiller, blender, cooper, maltster, mashman. I don't know what a mashman is. I drink a lot of whiskey, but I don't know what a mashman is. And so here, we're getting actually some really high context payloads that we can use to test our target. And I built a tool of this. And it's only not on GitHub at the moment because all of my API keys are hard-coded in. But as soon as I strip them out, this will be up on my GitHub profile at some point over the next few weeks. But I built this tool a little while ago, and it's basically a payload generator. And as you can see, I pass in the word list, and I give it a bunch of keywords for context. And this saves me kind of like typing out the prompt each time, and it also queries multiple models. So it'll be ChatGPT 4, Claude 3.7, Claude 3.5, and then it'll aggregate the results and spit them out to you. And basically, what happened was let me close this. If we come back to here and come back to our payload list and clear all of this, I've generated this already because I know that if I do this live, it's not going to give me the results I need. It's going to give me different ones. The main one is sommelier. I have no idea what a sommelier is, but when we come to here, and we've got 84 payloads, so we need to go 1 to, whoops, not 184, 1 to 84, and we just need to change this slightly. If we don't change the username, we'll just get invalid username already used, so our attack won't work, so we're just iterating over that. But we do basically the same thing with much higher context, and as you can see, when we render this, we get an expert reviews account. So this was basically the attack that I pulled off by using AI, and the first step didn't work. Like, that was just kind of for the demo, but I would never have found this if I hadn't have used ChatGPT 4 at the time to basically give me context, or to give me payloads that were suitable for my target. And there are a lot of business logic issues, there are a lot of access control issues, and there are a lot of other sequences within web applications, especially whenever you see a multi-step sequence in a web application where you go to cart and then you do something like apply a discount code and then you check out, or you're stepping through login, multi-factor authentication. That's where you're going to find vulnerabilities, because handling state between different steps and things like that, I'm not sure I've met a developer who accounts for everything that a user can do in terms of like refreshing, resending tokens, coming back, sending the same request twice, thinking about race conditions, and all sorts of other crazy stuff. So where we have step sequences and where we have complexity, that's where we're going to find vulnerabilities. And AI tools can help us basically exploit those vulnerabilities. And like I said, I would never have found this if without the help of an AI tool. All right, I'm doing all right for time. So yeah, in this case, we basically identify the potential for the issue based on the context and the application logic. So there are obviously lots of other cases where we can think about mass assignment. Whenever I see a put request, if I'm working with GraphQL, lots of web applications, when you go to your account page, when a API sends you loads of account details back, and then it's like, oh, I can update my username. What if I just change the parameter value to something else? Will the application just process that? Is it vulnerable to mass assignment? Are you blindly trusting the input that I'm sending? Or are you being very strict and using like an LL list so you can only update your username, for example? And this kind of reinforces my real belief is that AI is an enabler rather than a replacement, and I think it can make us more effective. A lot more effective is kind of, well, I suppose in this case, I wouldn't have found this vulnerability at all without AI. So it made me a lot more effective there. But I think generally speaking, a lot of developers that I've spoken to, a lot of the AppSec engineers, 10 to 20% productivity is kind of where they're benchmarking it. Another interesting story. So I don't really want to say this in front of a live audience, but when I'm attacking applications, I tend to try and stalk developers. So what I try and do is I try and find them on GitHub. I try and find all of the open source code that they have, things that they've contributed to. And as much as I enjoy doing code review, usually I don't have time to code review lots and lots, or like 10 years worth of projects. And so I pull them all down, I send them to whatever model I feel like. Usually I zip them up, and ChatGPT will just take on zip files now and unzip them and review them, or you can use Claude, open it up in VS Code and be like, review this. And it's a really good way to find common weaknesses and patterns. And if you do this against me, you'll find that a lot of common weaknesses in my own code, I'm really terrible at type juggling, which is where an issue where instead of using 3 equals, where we check a value and the type of 2 variables, it only checks the value. And so this is a common mistake that I've made throughout my entire development career. And I still do it today because I'm lazy, basically. And so that gives us some context about the target application, and it gives us areas to focus on. And without AI tools being able to very quickly understand not even just specific vulnerabilities, you're not even looking for vulnerabilities, you're looking for coding patterns and styles and particular variable names, because they'll be common across different applications. Going back to our mass assignment example, you might find property values that you wouldn't have known about unless you had access to the backend source code without doing this. So this is something that I do. And I have a small group of bug bounty friends, and like I say, we do a lot of stalking on GitHub. And there's also a famous bug bounty hunter who, he's the #1 bug bounty hunter for Meta or Facebook or whatever that company's called now. He goes to the developer conferences. He's like a beta tester for all of the new features, and that's how he finds stuff. He's like all about the context. He's the most power user of Facebook anybody has ever been, and makes lots of money because he finds all of the bugs. I think he goes to like dinner with their developers and all sorts of things. So AI can really, really help us here. And what's interesting is the first example I've given you is a very narrow scope. So when we're talking about mass assignment, we're like, okay, we're working on this vulnerability and a single endpoint. This is massive in scope. You could upload so much code for it to analyze. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing where when I'm using AI tools, I will either use it when I'm using something or attacking something very specific, or when I need to process a ton of data. And everything in the middle I can kind of do by myself. So these are my other regular use cases. So obviously one-time scripts and data manipulation. Yes, I'm reasonably fast at writing Python scripts, but I could spend 2 hours writing a script, or ChatGPT could write it for me in 10 seconds. So this is a pretty common use case. Code explanations. So something that was interesting when I was working at Rakuten, the tech stack within the organization is relatively static. And that means if you're an AppSec engineer or if you're a pen tester or if you're working on an internal team, what I'd say is actually when you find a function or you find some code, go read the documentation and go down the rabbit holes and really learn it so that you become an expert. If you're a consultant and you're working on a tech stack, whenever I see Java, my eyes start to bleed. And so I use AI to review that and just tell me what's going on. I'm like, what does this function do? Because I don't understand what this, like, I don't understand what Java is and why it exists. Sorry if you work in Java. Yeah, I'll buy you a drink later if you're a Java developer. Following weak code across multiple code bases. So this is something that, we've kind of like briefly talked about, but especially amongst teams or small teams or individual developers, this is something that we can do. And personally, I like looking at open source code and also NPM libraries as well. It's interesting that a lot of NPM libraries have a lot of issues, especially the ones that are kind of popular but not super popular. Not the ones with like 10 million weekly downloads, but the ones with like maybe 100,000 weekly downloads. If you start reviewing those, you're going to find some skeletons. And you'll find that a lot of NPM libraries like that aren't like super popular, there'll be a smaller group of engineers creating multiple libraries, and you'll find common weaknesses across them as well. So this is an interesting area for research. Again, if you're into code review, which most people aren't, but hey. Another great one from Jason Haddock's information about companies and acquisitions for bug bounty. I was talking to somebody about this earlier. Jason Haddock is also a really good person to follow because he's posting tons of stuff about use cases for AI. And he's a great engineer, great hacker, amazing bug bounty hunter. And one of the things he says is whenever we're doing bug bounty, for example, and we have our Apex domains, for the large scoped programs like things like MasterCard and other large organizations, their subsidiaries are in scope. And that means whenever they buy a company, they become in scope. And so if you're very fast or if you're monitoring the news, which is a lot of effort, but if you're monitoring lots of targets and you use AI to monitor the news for you, you can be the first to know about an acquisition. And that means you can be the first to a target. And that means you're going to find tons of stuff. The only company that I think has a 90-day do not touch is Google. They specifically said in their scope, they're like, if we buy somebody, they're out of scope for 90 days, which gives their team some time to come in and fix some stuff before the bug hunters come in and trash everything. And sanity check. So this is one of my favorite ones. So if I'm attacking something or if I'm looking at an endpoint and I've run out of ideas and I say, hey, ChatGPT, these are all the things I've done. This is what I'm considering. What do you think? And if it's like, oh yeah, you can inject cross-site request forgery tokens, I'm like, okay, no, it's done. Like, so when AI hallucinates, you're probably covered most of your main checks. So from like a sanity check perspective, or from a perspective where, if you're not using a checklist and you're like me and you kind of like go off on lots of tangents and attack web apps like a spider web rather than being really methodical. I'm not a methodical person. Then this is quite useful. And like I say, even when AI messes up, that kind of gives you some interesting insight. And down here, don't forget about your OPSEC. So if a client gives you all that code, I'll just stay over this side. If a client gives you all of their code, please make sure that you don't just upload it to something like ChatGPT. Or if you have sensitive information, so for example, sometimes when we're attacking a target, we're leaking information from that target using something like server-side request forgery, we send it to somewhere that we control, that we know that we're not like leaking sensitive data. So OPSEC is a big thing, especially when we're using AI tools. So I don't know, just bear that in mind, basically. And these are my opinions. So yeah, like my opinions are just things that I think that are happening. I have particular opinions, so take them all with a grain of salt because I'm just one person. But like I said before, I think AI tends to be useful when we're working in a very wide scope, or on a bunch of like 10,000 hosts or large code bases, or a very narrow scope. And I think in the middle, maybe it's not so useful. That's where it hallucinates, gets lost, goes down weird rabbit holes. And new tools are coming out every day. So I don't know if most of you who work in AppSec will know that Burp Suite just released a bunch of AI tools and also their API. So they've updated the Montoya API. There's a ton of new stuff coming. Some of it is kind of like really boring stuff, like explaining. You can just highlight stuff and explain. And I'm like, well, I could have just copied it into ChatGPT anyway. And some of it is like automated login, but some of it is also really powerful. And we're going to see a lot of really interesting extensions and things that are going to help our workflow soon. So, for example, my tool that creates payloads, I can probably build that as an extension in Burp Suite, and then I'm not going to have to come out, go to my Linux box, type it all in. I'm going to be able to link it to Burp Suite and be like, here are the parameters I already have, generate based on that, for example. We do see a lot of stuff kicking around, so there's a lot of hype around some stuff. What I'd say is get a POC that actually works in your environment. Don't accept proof of concepts that are against things like Portswigger Labs, against DVWA, against other purposefully vulnerable systems. It's a waste of time. Test stuff against targets or against real-life infrastructure and make assumptions based on that. We're seeing lots of crazy hype on lots of crazy things, and I don't know, just, it's like newspaper headlines or statistics. Whenever it says something like, 99.9% in 1 minute, it's like, well, I don't know. Just show me and then I'll believe it. And finally, we didn't even talk about attacking AI tools, so that's a whole nother can of worms. Attacks on AI-powered tools and how we use models and where our data goes and how it's stored and everything in between is honestly a minefield. Not really my area of expertise, but if you're thinking about using a tool, those are some of the questions that you need to be thinking about. And that kind of goes back to your OPSEC as well. And that's it for me today. So thanks from my two cats, Elfie and Poppy, and thanks for the team who invited me down. It was really lovely, and hopefully I'll see you all again at some point. And yeah, if you're into Java, I apologize. Beers on me. And that's it.